Messy and masterful. In this podcast, we speak about the success of people who have achieved, built, or done something amazing, special, remarkable, noteworthy, and/or fabulous. Think of presidents, doctors, chefs, architects, filmmakers, writers, philosophers, CEOs, journalists, and the list goes on and on of people who've had a genuine impact on this world. But rather than underlining their career victories, we speak about the challenges they needed to overcome to actually get there. In each episode, we discuss 3 of such challenges, obstacles, difficulties, and/or hurdles with our guest, putting the messy of their lives next to the masterful. A very warm welcome to you. My name is Alder Bab, and I'm so happy you could make it. So sit back, relax, and download the podcast here.
I was raised not to challenge authority. If somebody elder to you is telling you, be it a parent, a relative, a teacher, this is north, you say, yes, this is north. When I came to France, and again goes back to when I started school, we used to have classes like these lessons with real world journalists who would come in for, lectures. And at the end of each talk, there used to be a Q&A round. And that's when I realized I didn't know how to ask a question. And here I was wanting to be a journalist.
Yes, and a very good day to you. I'm very happy you could make it for another episode of Messy and Masterful. The great conversation I had with Nandita Tandan. I speak to Nandita, who's a former journalist from Indian descent, currently living in France, and we take a little trip down memory lane. Nandita tells us the story of when she first came to France, being admitted to one of the best schools in France to become a journalist, and kind of what a culture shock that was coming from India. So it's a very funny conversation about kind of all the do's and don'ts when meeting France and the French for the first time. We also take it down the professional route as we speak to Nandita about her professional insights and experiences, both the good and the bad, on telling stories. What makes these stories different when you tell them online? And Nandita also sheds a light on how to deal with information that is confused, either intentionally or not, specifically when finding them on social media, whereby many messages that we find there are manipulated either through artificial intelligence or deliberately disseminated as fake news or alternative facts. So very interesting conversation. I think it is important to point out that we recorded this conversation before the conflict in the Middle East exploded as it did. So that's why there's no mention of that in this conversation, because I do appreciate that social media currently is also taking a life of its own, specifically when it comes to messaging around all the things happening in the Middle East. If you miss any of that in this conversation, that is because it was recorded before that. Check out more about Nandita's work as editor-in-chief at Art Explored, where she currently works, in our show notes. A great organization, a great initiative. I hope you will check it out and give it the attention it deserves. Without further ado, episode 67, interview with Nandita Tandan, the digital storyteller. Yes, and we are live. It is a Thursday, and a Thursday afternoon here in Scotland, as well as in Paris, where my guest currently resides. This episode is a very special one, where before we have been talking to people with some professions that are of all ages. So we've spoken to a minister, we've spoken to a dean, a princess, a CIA spy, you name it. We have so many in our series and in our seasons. I'm today talking to someone who's a digital storyteller, which I think sounds fascinating. So a very warm welcome to Nandita Vijay Tan. I'm sorry, I hope I pronounced that correctly.
No, it's Nandita Vij Tandan.
Nandita Vij Tandan.
You can re-record us. Yeah.
I'm very sorry.
It's okay.
And I'm even more sorry, Nandita, because we've known each other for such a long time
Fine.
that I can't pronounce your last name.
You can even just call me Nandita in it, and it's fine. I'm okay with my first name identity. It's fine.
Well, it is very good to see you. It has been a while. We are, as I said before, we've known each other for quite a while, worked together in some shape or form, and I hope we can dive into that further in the interview. It's always lovely to meet you and to sit down with you and to listen into kind of all the great ideas that you have. But let's just open with a question that is on my mind, and I'm sure is on the mind of many listeners. What is a digital storyteller?
So, a digital storyteller is somebody who can tell you a story, keep you engaged, but through different formats, and also try and break down very complex issues into simpler, nicer ways of understanding a topic, in getting engaged in a topic. So it's just like the way you would go on a Netflix to watch a documentary or watch a series but gets you hooked. What I do is I get people to engage around a topic or an issue. It can be a social issue, and then I get them hooked to try and engage and to contribute. So that's what I am, but I do it on digital, so I do it online. So when I started my career, it started online, and that's where I realized it was an awesome medium to reach a much broader community and get them together as well. So it wasn't just about a one-way communication. There was a dialogue, and that dialogue could also lead to people getting together. But all that you do together, you have to have a story, you have to have a narrative, you have to have an issue.
Yeah.
And what I do is I try and tell that story on through a website, through social media, or any other channel that is easily accessible to people.
It reminds me a little bit of PR in a way. Is that weird of me to think that it's kind of like trying to convey a certain image and then that image is a story into the world, or is it something very different?
For me, it's not so much an image. For me, it's actually talking about the issue and raising awareness.
Okay.
So, yes, it's part of PR, but it's more like advocacy where you
Yeah.
would raise awareness about an issue. So, to give you an example, in the past, I've worked on education, okay, and I've worked on gender rights. And in both cases, there were issues. Of course, we know about illiteracy, but we don't know about the details of what's lacking or what's happening in the world of education outside the walls of schools. And my aim there was to tell the stories of all the entrepreneurs like yourself, and that's where we met, of what you're doing outside school to facilitate education, to take it a step forward, to innovate. So for me, that's the story I'm telling. I'm telling the stories of people, their initiatives, their lives when it came to education. And so, yeah, it's not so much PR, it's more about building awareness, sharing information, educating, and also allowing people to know that they can do something about it.
Yeah.
So, and also getting them to act.
So there's a clear call to action after you've told the story. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why we say CTA on social media. What's your call to action?
Yeah.
It's not just, in my case, it's not just about read here or click here.
Yeah.
It's also engage, do something about it.
Yeah. So let's go back to the very beginning of things, Nandita.
Okay. Yeah.
So you are originally from India, and,
Yes.
and you moved to France where you studied.
Yes.
And just like any other of our guests, you've sent us your challenges. And actually the first one I love to read because I really see you starting to study in Paris.
Right.
And as your challenge, you said, like, accept the choices you make. And you you even translated in French, il faut assumer. Tell me a little bit about kind of that. I assume it was a culture shock starting your life in France, or what
It
was
was
it like?
a lot of things. So when I came, already the academic systems are very different between the two countries. So I came to France for my higher studies, for my master's. And organically, as an Indian, you would probably choose the States or you would choose an English-speaking country to pursue your higher education. I wanted to pursue my higher education in a country where I could learn something new. And also, I wanted to pursue journalism. So, for someone who loves taking on challenges, and I've realized that over the years, but that's my nature, I love taking on challenges. I decided to come to France to pursue my journalism at Sciences Po, which is a very prestigious school here in Paris. So everything's great. I land, and it was actually my first time ever outside of home. I come from a family where, I did my education in the same city. I grew up, always home, never stayed in a hostel or never lived away from the family. So this was literally my first time ever, ever, ever leaving home. Anyway, I land here. So yes, there's a culture shock. But also when I kind of started school, I realized that the curriculum that had been communicated had nothing to do with what the curriculum actually was, which basically meant I came thinking I was coming for a bilingual program back in 2006, except I came for a program that was completely in French.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And they had a few modules in English, but it was almost 95% in French. And at that point, and this I discovered within the first 10 days of the program, and that point I had a choice given by the school was either I withdrew or I took on another program. And that's where I said there was a choice I had made back in India was to do journalism in France. And there was a reason behind it. So there was no turning back or there was no opting out. So I went through the 2 years. I managed to find my way of, dealing with every teacher, every class, every lesson. And yeah, it was always about moving forward. There was no turning back and saying, "Oh my word, why did I take this decision?" Or let me just hop out and jump. So that's why I say il faut assumer because I made a choice and I have to see it through. So yeah.
Nice. Well, that's a wonderful story. So you showed perseverance, you plowed on, and you got that degree.
It was also a blessing in disguise. I entered this competition that was held by the Wall Street Journal. I was one of the prize winners. Again, there were opportunities that appeared. Had I given up right in the beginning, I wouldn't have had those opportunities.
Yeah.
And where I am today is because I went through that program
Yeah.
and because of the school. So I owe them a lot. But I also, now I realize it, of course, after all these years, is that, and that's also something I tell my daughter now, is never to regret. You've made a choice. At that point, that choice seemed the right one. So just get through with it and don't worry about, the consequences.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, so that's what my story is.
I tend to agree. I think I studied international relations in Utrecht, and kind of, 2 years in, I was like, what is the practical angle to this? What can I, once I have a degree for this, what can I do? And then I thought, well, I have two options here. Either I stop now, but then I've wasted 2 years, or I get the degree and then try to fine tune later, right? And I chose the latter options. Like, well, at least I have that degree, and then after I did an MBA. So it's better to stick with your choices and go with it. Of course, if it's not a malicious choice, or if there's no malicious outcome, of course, but because you will come out stronger and you can fine tune later on, I'd say.
Indeed, and I think that was somewhere also my almost I call it my sandbox or my playground, where what was fascinating about this program at Sciences Po was that it was so hands-on and practical that I got opportunities to work in a television newsroom, of course as an intern, and at a radio station. I also worked as a producer, for an agency. And there were so many different mediums that I got to know. And among them, there was this little thing called multimedia. And this is back in 2006, where online journalism was just barely picking up, 2004, 2006. Facebook existed, but back in the US, not everyone had access.
Yeah.
So we're talking about digital, but really in the early years.
Yeah.
And that's where I realized that it was an amazing medium where you could actually mix television, radio, print,
Yeah.
bring the formats together and tell amazing stories.
Yeah.
So somewhere where I am today is also because I just stuck onto that choice.
Yeah. What's the difference between me reading a good article in the Financial Times? I have a weekend subscription to the Financial Times, and I love just having the paper in my hands and reading the article, taking a deep dive. I'm not sure, like what's the difference between me reading that article print and then online? Kind of, is there a big difference? Is there not? What would you say?
Well, it depends. I still read. I still love reading. I haven't given that up. I mean, there's nothing better than reading a newspaper and just taking your time out. unfortunately we don't have that much time. But yeah, even reading a magazine or reading a book, it's leisure now. It's,
Yeah.
it's luxury, it's leisure,
Prime
it's
time. Yeah.
leisure
It's
time.
quality time. Yeah.
It's quality time with yourself. So I won't challenge it, but yes, what is different is that on a website or on an online portal, you can cater to everybody's interests. So, for example, you love reading, so you'll probably look at the print part. Maybe somebody who loves video more, or who has a better affinity to listening, you can also offer other formats. So now, for example, online there are also media, and you talked about the Financial Times, and there are other reputed media today, where you can literally listen to the article instead of reading.
Yeah.
So what's happening especially in today's generation, where attention span isn't more than 3 minutes, let's just say,
Mhm.
people tend to listen more. Even like when you take, audiobooks today, people are turning to audiobooks because they don't have time to sit and read, which is unfortunate, but that's the reality we live in. Multimedia allows you, with all those formats of sound and video, to reach a much broader audience. And why I loved multimedia also was, and this is back when I started working in television, right after school, or even radio, actually, even radio, you reach an audience that doesn't necessarily read. So we're
Yeah.
also reaching out to people who are illiterate and who don't have the means to, read, or don't have the basics, or don't have the means to even like subscribe to a newspaper.
Yeah.
But just the sound of video, everybody has a telephone today.
Yeah.
In India, I mean, you see, everybody has a phone, everybody's connected. So there's so much you can do. Oh, and of course, like anything and everything, there's also misuse. Nobody's denying that. But your reach in terms of content can be so much stronger if you offer different platforms, different mediums.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about digital.
Yeah. And have you, because I'm just going to be devil's advocate here. So I just, there are also loads of problems with social media platforms, right?
Yeah.
Take them as an example,
Yes.
whereby, one of the main criticism, and you raised it as well, is like people don't have big concentration spams anymore. And basically we're feeding the beast by kind of playing that game, kind of, dumbing it down, onto
Yeah.
such levels that people don't get the intricacies anymore. Moreover, they think it's not even needed to know an entire story, right? Have
Mhm.
you ever experienced that people
I
don't
have.
ask for the details and an opposite effect? Yeah. Can you give an example? Like, when did that happen and how did you tackle it?
So, no, it also happens with writers I work with.
Hmm.
They'll always stay just on the top layer, they'll never go deep down. And when you ask them for more context and background, and always this debate about, will people really be interested? But people are interested if you give it to them. And this goes back to the journalism rules that we learned, was like, don't treat your readers as ignorant. Yes, you're supposed to give them background. Yes, you're supposed to give them context, but don't treat them as if they're not intelligent. If the more
Hmm.
you give them, the nicer it is. And I'm also realizing that as a mother now, where when my child watches something online, and she'll be aware, but she won't know the story behind. We'll talk about the solar system, for example.
Hmm.
She'll watch a little video. It'll be about the planets, the names of the
Hmm.
planets. Okay. But we won't go beyond that. And I agree with what you're saying. There are limitations to digging deeper. Nobody's going into an encyclopedia now like we did to try and do more research or trying
Hmm.
to read more about it. That inquisitiveness, yes, has died because everything is available
Yeah.
all the time. If you need more information, you can go onto Wikipedia, or you can go onto Google, or you can find Britannica online and you'll get the information.
Hmm.
So that, yes, I agree. But in the content that we develop, that I work on projects, we try to actually start from the basics.
Hmm.
The project that I'm currently working on, Art Explored, it's about educating people about art.
Hmm.
That means giving them the 101 about art.
Hmm.
We start with formal analysis of what are the 7 characteristics of art. Then you go on to, who were the artists? Who were they as people? Who were they as artists? What are the different, periods, or what your artistic style? You're really going into 101. So that's what I mean by digital storytelling,
Yeah.
is about educating and informing
Hmm.
people about a topic. The same thing when I worked in education, we talked about entrepreneurs like yourself, not just about the solutions, but also what were they addressing, what the challenges were, trying to dig in deeper.
Mm.
give more information, give more context. And I agree, it doesn't always work because there's so much content out there today. And at the end of the day, it depends. You'd rather sit and watch something light that doesn't require too many, too much brain power.
Yeah.
But then it also depends how you package your
Yeah.
content. If it's
Well, I
set
mean,
in
I think one thing doesn't exclude the other. I think you're
no,
right. If you basically say, like, listen, the information is there and it is provided, that I think is already a big
yeah,
game changer. That is already very acceptable for me, rather than saying, well, it needs to be snappy for 140 characters, so
no,
let's leave out the details, and let's not bother people with sources. Or also in educating the next generation,
exactly.
let's be respectful towards sources and towards how a story comes together, because it's often not, it doesn't come overnight, right? It's kind of,
No, no,
the
exactly.
organizations you've worked with, they've put a lot of work in their narrative and in their story, and they don't want the content to be diminished or
Indeed, and I think it's about it's also a reality we're living in, and like
yeah,
something we need to accept is that our kids are going to they don't know an internet-free world.
yeah.
We were having a conversation over dinner with my daughter. I'm sorry, I'm deviating, but it comes to what we're saying, and we just asked her a question the other day, like, "Do you know what we did when we were little kids and when we had free time?" And she said, "Watch Netflix." it's it's part of their being now.
Yeah, watching
And
it.
I said, we didn't have internet back then. And she just stared at me. She's six. Okay, she's not
Yeah.
very big. She's 6 years old. And she just stared at me and you didn't have Netflix?
Yeah,
And that's when I realized, like, oh my word, you
yeah,
know. And that's when it also and something it occurred to me since quite especially during COVID, we have to teach our kids to be curious.
yeah,
It's not everything on a platter, you
yeah,
know? So,
yeah,
yes, if she's finding that information on Google about the solar system, she needs to go in and dig a little deeper.
yeah,
So, so yes, it's great
yeah,
to go to libraries. We continue doing that. But
yeah,
there's this reality of online storytelling,
yeah,
which they're going to grow up with, and
yeah,
they need to be taught to be curious, to dig
yeah.
deeper, to go further.
I agree. It's better to educate them and harness them, so they know how to navigate, on such sources or platforms or whatever it is, rather than saying, no, we banish this from your life, and, because they're going to be
Exactly.
confronted with it anyways, right? That's not to say that their life should be screen time 24/7. It's
No.
just to say that you can't think it away anymore. So you better learn how to,
How to
how
navigate
how should
it.
they work, how
Yeah.
they should work with it, or how they should interpret it. Yeah,
And yeah, and there's like everything, like when we were kids, there were limits on even what we use, be it reading a book, how much time you spent on studying, how much time you
yeah,
spent on playing outside. It's the same thing, but it's a different dynamic that we're living
yeah,
in today. We just need to learn how to juggle it. And again, going back to digital storytelling, we also need them to recognize what is authentic and what is fake.
yeah,
I've come across like kids and teenagers in our friend circle who just say, but I saw it on Instagram, and but that's not the truth.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we have another challenge of teaching kids of how to recognize right from wrong.
Yeah, exactly what you're saying. That is one of the kind of dangers that I foresee, because at a certain point we won't be able to tell either. I mean, it becomes increasingly difficult. It's to kind of recognize what is and what isn't. And that brings me to my next question. So you said, like, already 2000, from 2004 to 2006, you felt attracted to the online side of things.
Mhm.
Now, naturally, a lot has evolved.
It
So,
has.
so how has that impacted your storytelling? So, if you were to take on a story now for the organization you currently work with, like, is the setup already completely different of how it was in 2004, or do you say no, we,
Oh
we still
yes, it
start in
is.
the same level?
No, no, it is. It's you have to think 360, and now back in the day, you would think a particular target audience, okay, or
Yeah,
you would just say. Of course, I worked in the news business, so it was everybody. But then when I started working for on specific, projects, and so with specific companies, there was always an audience that you were targeting. You
yeah,
would target. You had specific segment of the population in mind. Now that it's online, you have to think of everybody, and you have to also think of what would interest everybody. So you
Yeah.
cannot just say I'm just taking an example here, our website will only be print with static visuals. You have to also think of people who may probably love an audio, audio cast or a podcast. You have to also think of people who may love video.
Yeah.
So if you want a project to be successful and you want your message to reach maximum number of people, you have to think 360. You have to think of for everyone, and you have to think of every possible format that would work, of course, with your story. You don't do it for the sake of doing it. And in addition to that, you have to also think of how do you put your story together so there's consistency, you
Yeah.
know, at every level, that the message, you don't talk to a 6 year old the same way you would probably talk to a 16 or a 60-year-old.
Yeah.
You have to also shape your messages in a way that they reach and they're understood by the person who's looking at the message.
Yeah. I like what you're saying, like adjust your message to,
To
to
who?
the target group, huh? To
Exactly.
who you want to listen. One of the problems that some people might be struggling with is the noise that's already there.
Yeah.
So how do you make a distinction? Like, I take now the U.S. presidential elections next year.
Mhm.
So, the GOP candidates are now fighting for their position.
Yes.
So you see kind of each candidate has their own approach to things. And then you don't necessarily know what makes, because it's all kind of a media game. It's all kind of
Yes.
which medium will give me the most of attention, so that people hear about my message, right? So I'm trying to get to the bottom of, do you in your story try to cater to the needs of the media? Are you trying to get an appealing angle out there so they pick up on it and they can amplify your message? Or is it more like, well, it'd be a very discreet small tweet, but it's very kind of consistent with what I do then on Instagram or kind of other platforms? What can you say about maybe about the amplification if you want people to hear your story?
Okay, so this is where the whole, it's, you can call it ironic, but even for your digital story to work, you want the human factor in there.
Yeah,
So you want your story supported by experts and shared by experts,
yeah,
because that's what brings authenticity to,
yeah,
whatever you're saying.
yeah,
Just imagining figures and imagining data and imagining statistics. And this again, it goes probably back to the foundations and to what at least I learned as a journalist is, what's your source?
yeah,
When you're making a claim, you're talking about something, you're talking about a topic. Let's just take, challenges in the field you worked a lot, like with TeachPitch,
yeah,
is, challenges facing teachers.
yeah,
Very easy to just kind of, read 5 reports and say, oh, challenges facing teachers are not enough resources and salaries are not high.
yeah,
You can bring up a list, but there's much more to it.
yeah,
So when you're producing your story or you're producing your content, you need to go to the relevant experts, speak to them.
yeah,
They're the ones who carry your narrative. And then you build your network of ambassadors, who we also call influencers in the digital world today. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to have 1 million followers. It's like, it's not the how many, it's the who.
yeah,
You follow them, and that's how you get your word across.
yeah,
In the case of the project we worked on together for Qatar Foundation for Wise, we brought the education community together.
yeah,
We brought the actors together. We created a dialogue, and
yeah,
a lot of it started online actually.
yeah,
Through Twitter chats and conversations and online conversations, just putting people together, the right experts together, and that's how the narrative spread. You
yeah,
talked about the GOP. You talked about elections coming through. A lot of people will use clickbait just to get people to click, but that's when it gets dangerous because you're
mm,
giving them half-baked information. And that's why, as a digital storyteller, I also have the responsibility to make sure that what I'm putting out there, one, I can take claim for it, I'm responsible, and two, it doesn't backfire or lead to a social misunderstanding,
yeah,
which unfortunately is the reality today. Narratives are manipulated, mindsets are manipulated, and
yeah. Which story are you most proud of that you've in your career thus far you've told?
actually, each one of them. I'm proud in self because I can own it. In every story that I've been there, I've created something. I've been part of something that's been created. So France 24, I started out as a junior producer. and we built this media platform today called France 24, France Media Monde. Then when I went on to when I went to work with Auditoire, and that's where Wise happened. Wise is something, again, it existed, but then the online is something that we built together from scratch. And that's also in what I do. I look more for meaning in, like, if I go in there, what's my value added? I look for blank canvases and I just like to draw on it.
Yeah.
And every opportunity, and I'm very proud of Art Explore that we've just launched. It's a brand new platform on
Yeah.
art, it's education and information. It's been a whole new world of education, even for me. And just building that platform makes me proud because, one, of course, we built platform, just building the content, keeping the audiences in mind, getting the experts on board, building like every block, putting it together. It's like a Lego. You build every little brick you put together, and in the end you have this beautiful product.
Mhm.
I don't think I have one favorite because everything I've been part of so far has been building from scratch and
Yeah.
then just see it grow.
Yeah.
Um,
Introed your second challenge as well, because you basically said you like to start with a blank canvas, and
I
that's your
do,
second challenge. You said
do.
create your own path.
Exactly.
Don't count on others to shape it for you.
No,
Yeah, and don't join the rat race. Choose opportunities where you have a blank slate to create something new. Now that sounds lovely, but it also can make it more difficult
it
in
is.
some cases,
It
right?
is. It
Yeah.
is because you end up questioning yourself all the time.
Mm.
Is it the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? And this actually goes, I do give my parents credit for that, simply because when I was back in school and I had to make my higher education choices, I had friends who were going into, the mainstreams. Some were going into engineering, some were going into commerce and banking, and they aren't my strongest subjects. And I love languages. And that's why my parents explained to me, saying, it's okay if you love languages. How about you learn French? And then you can do something with it. We didn't know what, but it was just going down a new
Yeah.
path. At that time, it seemed strange. It seemed like you're an outsider. You don't belong to the main group. But over time, you realize that it's okay. And,
Yeah.
because I took a path that suited me, I'm a much happier person today rather
Yeah.
than following a rat race and finding yourself in a rut where everybody's doing the same thing. Speaking of now, there are a lot of people doing digital as well. But back when I started with, there were very few of us,
Yeah.
and it felt different. And now within the digital space, I'm trying to create new products, or I'm trying to create new experiences. So I'm always looking for keeping my skill set in mind. It's not about changing your skills all the time. You see what you have, and then you create your own path. And about not letting others decide for you is simply goes back to my first point of making your choices and then seeing them through and
Yeah.
delivering them. So if you make your decision, then you're responsible for what happens, and you can't blame
Yeah.
others. So it's a simple philosophy.
Yeah, the only caveat that I would raise is that maybe sometimes people do not respond to your story in the way that you want. Like, for instance, if an
Oh.
expert is not happy with what you've written and kind of goes against the grain and says, "Well, this is not a good story. I don't want to hear this story."
Mhm.
What do you do then? What kind of do you have an example where it backfired?
It does
Basically, that's
happen
yeah,
a lot.
yeah,
No, no, it does. And it's happened when I was in mainstream journalism. It's happened when we worked, on multiple initiatives where there'll always be an expert who'll come and say, your narrative's off, it doesn't make sense. And that's why we've tried to go and understand what's gone wrong, and storytelling is not about your own opinion. I was once asked in a job interview about, like, so what does Nandita say on social media? And I'm like, Nandita doesn't say anything on social media because Nandita's role is not only to share her own opinion, but also to bring what the experts have to say.
yeah, yeah,
So you find middle ground. You put your
yeah,
perspective forward. If somebody does come challenging you, and if it's somebody who is relevant to the topic and an authority, of course you listen, and then you try and develop on that narrative. Doesn't mean you have to go and say, oh, I'm so sorry, we made a mistake. Of course, if you made a mistake, you made a mistake. But if it's a
yeah.
narrative that may be complementing or conflicting, you find middle ground,
Yeah,
and
you
that.
can still work with a conflicting one. I can imagine that if a narrative is a discussion, let's say around education, and someone doesn't agree and has another opinion, then you can welcome them to the discussion. So it feeds the same story in the end. It just
It's,
enriches the story, right? It's kind
it
of like,
does,
well,
and
there
it's
are people who think
two
differently.
sides of the same coin.
Yeah,
There's some for, there's some
yeah,
against. It's a happy debate. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's a rich debate,
yeah,
and that's what a dialogue is. We can agree to disagree, and it's all
yeah,
right. And that's the beauty of online. Going back to what you said about print, where you read an opinion but you can't engage, but online you can engage.
yeah. Okay, so now you're saying trigger words to me, now in a good way, because I'm intentionally always going to kind of the worst case scenario of what you say, right? Because one of the criticisms here is something called cancel culture, and
Hmm.
people being too woke, right? That's kind
Yeah.
of, people
Yes.
being too sensitive about what's in those 140 characters,
Agreed.
b-
Yeah.
putting it under a microscope and then condemning the entire person and his or her
Mhm.
career. Whereas those 130 characters could be open to other interpretation, but no one wants to hear anymore because they have mobilized the mobs against you, the online mobs against you, and off you go. Careers have been destroyed because of it.
Yes. Yes.
But they all have the same story. So for you, I'm not saying you're that storyteller, but these people are storytellers in a way as well, or they want to be. They're bad
They,
ones. They're malicious, but they are successful in getting their point maybe across in a certain way. Or I might be too harsh here, but
no,
what's
but
your how do you
for
see
me,
this?
that's the unfortunate side of social media today, per se, or even online conversation. There is no moderation. That's probably the downside of digital is you don't see the person, you don't feel how they feel. It just loses the human touch.
Yeah,
Which is why I say in all these dialogues or in all the content that you produce, it's important to have human voices. It's important. And even if you're on social, I don't know if you've noticed, content that has human side to it or a humane side to it will attract you more naturally than something that's just static and cold.
yeah,
You know, just an opinion with a little picture on the side, you forget that there's a real human being
yeah,
behind the screen or the phone who's typed that message. And it leads to misunderstandings, like in text messages. It's better to give a phone call or go meet the person
yeah,
to have a conversation than go into an argument on a text message because
yeah,
that's relationships are also breaking today.
yeah, yeah,
Simple. You don't realize the tone. You don't understand where that person's coming from. You don't have the background that you mentioned earlier. You don't have the full story.
yeah,
So I'm not even going to debate this for you. It is a negative point
yeah,
today online, on social media, on digital. Journalists, it takes, or even writers, it takes so much thought, so much work and courage to put yourself out there. And that's the lack of, I think that's the lack of the emotional connect that's missing
yeah,
today, that you tend to just feel it's okay to go criticize and cancel anyone and it doesn't matter. You just, you criticize and you go ahead with your life. It's the person who's reading it. And I've seen with so many personalities on social media who've broken down mentally because of
mm,
this. So I think that's like the next challenge that needs to be
yeah.
addressed.
My theory is that we sometimes confuse social media platforms to be an actual world. I think we are too sometimes too immersed into what's happening there, whereas it is merely a kind of a reflection or a snippet of our real lives. And we put those snippets on there, but we put so much on there that we then think, oh, this is what our life is. This is what our life looks like, right?
It's
This
true.
is
It's
not
true.
how our life what our lives looks like. This is just like very carefully selected snippets of information we
Yeah,
put on there for image building or whatever strategic
indeed.
reasons. And
Indeed.
then because we spend so much time on there, unfortunately, because there are addictive features in there, we confuse it for the real world. And this is where the bickering starts. This is where, like, how dare you say this? And
Exactly.
but this is not the real world. You're just you're just
It's virtual. It is virtual.
it is virtual, and it's not even a world. And I think, again, bringing it back to our daughters, because I
Yeah.
have a 4-year old, you have a 6-year old. I would not want them to confuse that for the real world, right? That's one of the things in kind of harnessing them is like, no, 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 don't be on there because you think that's not where you're going to graduate, or where you're going
Exactly.
to grow
No,
up, or
exactly.
whatever. Yeah,
And that's not the end game.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
that's why I mean I think that goes back to saying they need to be curious. Yes, you know where to go find your information, And yes, there is this thing of, everybody literally being, hooked onto the devices today, because I guess people know more about what's happening on in an influencer's life today than what's happening probably with the GOP. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
probably going to get criticized for saying this, but it's also a reality we live with.
Yeah.
You know, but it comes back also to I think families, individuals, of how they manage it. Be it kids, it has to be parents and teachers. I won't just say parents; it's both sides. But you need to inculcate it. It's like how when we were young, there was balance that was inculcated in us. This time for play, this time for this. It's about, conversing and not just saying, okay, no, this is banned, this is not allowed.
Yeah.
That's also cancel culture.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is. Yeah.
The more you push them away from it, the more curious they're going to get about it. So
Yeah.
rather have a dialogue about it, rather talk about it. I have mine who goes saying, if you don't know the answer, you can go onto YouTube, mama. And I'm like, more recently, now that she can, she's beginning to read, I'm like, or we can open a book and read,
Yeah.
both sides.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easier, yes, on YouTube when you're out on the road and you have this,
Yeah.
she's
She's in the
curious
back of
about
the car.
something,
Yeah.
wants to know right away, you don't have a book. But when you're home or you have the resources, you say, hey, look, we can also see it in the book. So
Yeah.
it's really how we deal with that challenge that we have today of
Yeah.
this cancel culture. Yes, it's there. It's also leading to issues with bullying online, kids being harassed. It's for us to, or the ones who are putting content out there, it's also a responsibility in a way to help people navigate this ecosystem. I won't, like you said, it's not a world, it's an ecosystem
Yeah.
that's used for communication and for
Yeah.
building communities. And I think that's where we got lost a little. It's become more like a platform for advertising, and it's become more a platform for, putting yourself out there and getting the recognition that you feel you
Yeah.
need. And again, that like any celebrity has two sides. Some will hate, some will love.
Yeah.
You live with it. I get a lot of feedback and criticism at times of, because I'm not very active myself on social media. I put content out there, but I put it out from an organization perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's my choice.
Yeah. Of
You know,
course. Yeah.
I don't want to put my personal life out there. There's narrative, there's storytelling, there's content, but it's not about me.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, if I get onto some, I don't know, I go on a massive adventure to, or I pursue something that's great and it's worth telling the world, my personal story, great. But as of today, I don't feel the need to put myself out there.
Yeah. So you shouldn't, right? You
Exactly.
don't have.
You
Yeah.
shouldn't. If you don't think it's
Yeah.
your choice, and you don't need to feel
Well,
obligated to be there.
what I see is that the people who are seemingly successful, they have a clear game plan on what
Yeah,
they're doing on those platforms, right?
they do.
They
Yeah.
have a very they have they're also digital storytellers, but the
Mhm.
story of their personal brand. And they share images and ideas, but they do it with such a nonchalance, so
Yeah.
such a
Yeah.
ease that it looks like I need to have this in my life as well. And I think that kind of I think some people forget that. Well, no, listen, if an actor who has millions of followers posts something, that is being that is strategic. There's a reason why that is posted. There's a reason why that is. I mean, there are the exceptions, right? But I think the ones that are work best, they have thought it through. It isn't for many, it isn't a kind of spur of the moment post.
No, and
Um,
no, no,
it,
and I
it's
agree.
yeah. Contrary to what it may seem, because it seems like a very quick tool to just share whatever you want. Whereas I see people who thrive are actually, they've defined a strategy and they're merely executing on that strategy.
And they're
And
not alone. They have
yeah,
teams.
and they have to, and in some cases they have teams. Well,
It's
also that's something that people don't see. Yeah,
it's an ecosystem, and
yeah,
that's where the whole thing seems so simple, except it's not.
yeah,
Yes, a person's putting him or herself out there as a brand, but ultimately they become a brand.
yeah,
And then you have a whole team of, PR and social media specialists and marketing specialists. It's literally working around
yeah,
that brand to
yeah,
make that brand thrive.
yeah,
So so yes, that's where you need to understand that what you're seeing is not just
yeah,
that posted inspirational posted that you see on a Monday morning maybe has been thought through.
yeah. Yeah.
by a bunch of people together to say, look, if you put that out, this is the impact it's going to have people's mindset, right?
Yeah.
So
On a Monday morning, people get up. They're like, "Oh my God, I have to get on to the week." So it's like, you get someone with black coffee saying, "Come on, you can do this." That's what you
yeah,
need, right?
and but that's thought through,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
takes weeks of planning
Yeah.
and it takes weeks of content development to just put that one post out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've often heard people say, "Oh, but it's okay. Even my 16-year-old could do that." That I find challenging in today's world where people think that whatever they see, I'm not saying there are not enough tools that are available out there. There are a lot of tools out there, but people who are producing quality content, it's not easy. And when I say people, it's also organizations or it's
Yeah.
media. It takes a lot of resources,
Well,
time,
I think,
energy.
and that's where you come in, right? You help with fine tuning the story and
Yes,
telling it in such a way
yeah,
that people will understand and that that
exactly.
people can build on it. And
Yeah.
I think that's what people forget. And in their defense, the platforms are made to make it look easy.
I agree.
That's the treacherous bit. Yeah.
I don't challenge that, but it's
Yeah.
also when you go talking to people who, I've heard also people think, oh, but this influencer's life's amazing, the person's just traveling all the time. But we're not seeing the other side of it, of that person never being with their family or that person, missing out on a lot of other things because they're doing this. I
Yeah.
had a friend who was running this travel influencer, channel, and she was always on the road,
Yeah.
but she was also a mother, and she was a single mom. And she is a single mom. She's managing it all together, putting it all together. But when you have the rest of the world saying, oh yeah, but she's always traveling, she's having a blast. It's not really a blast.
No.
You
No.
only see snippets of the amazing things when you see the final product, but you don't see the challenges that the production team's been through to bring that product to you.
Again, we confuse her post with the world, right? It's not a world. She's a
Exactly.
content creator. She just puts something out there.
It's a job.
It's a job. That's not where she is at the moment she
Yeah.
posts it either. I feel we can talk for hours about this, but we don't have hours,
No,
unfortunately.
I know.
Let's go to your third challenge, which I thought
Sure.
was also very interesting, which is, and I think our listeners have already caught on to that, is like you speak your mind. And you've written, I come from a military family where we
Oh yeah.
just said yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, and never challenged authority.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you land in a world where your
And
opinion,
in France.
and in France of all places, where people want to share their opinion left, right, and center, where discussion is actually kind of the lifeblood, right? It's kind of
Right.
if you discuss, you live. That's kind of my wife's French, so I know a few things about it. Like when we discuss, everyone comes alive, and it doesn't matter if you scream at each other. That's it's forgotten the next moment, right? So it's a beautiful thing. I love it now, but I had to get used to it. So how was that for you? And for that matter, I really I visualize you, you know, on your first day in Paris. It's almost like a book, like you being kind of coming from India. Sorry, where did you grow up in India?
So I grew up in Chandigarh, so it's a city between Haryana and Punjab in the north.
Okay, yes, yeah,
I grew up. My dad was in the military. Big part of my family is the military or services, so administrative
mm,
services. So I come from, but it's not just specific to the military. I mean, that was just an anecdotal I was telling you,
yeah,
but in general, we're raised to not challenge. We don't
mm,
challenge authority. I was raised not to challenge authority. If somebody elder to you is telling you, be it a parent, a relative, a teacher, this is north, you say,
mm,
yes, this is north. You'll never say, why is it north? Or even there are very few who would challenge it. I'm not saying that everybody is like that. There are kids who challenge it, but I wasn't one of them.
yeah,
So I would just, keep my head down, just follow what needs to be done, and that's it. When I came to France, and again goes back to when I started school, we used to have classes like these lessons with real world journalists who would come in for lectures, and they would come for, to just give a talk. And at the end of each talk, there was used to be a Q&A round, of asking questions. And that's when I realized I didn't know how to ask a question, leave alone challenge authority, but
Mm.
just like cross questioning. And here I was wanting to be a journalist.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, did you see asking a question as resisting authority? What did
No,
you?
the curiosity
Yeah,
bit,
the curiosity. So you couldn't be curious either.
you can be curious.
Yeah.
The question for me, the question, asking a question, or even when that question and answer would start, debates would spark.
Mm.
You would have the guests still sharing their opinion when another kid, like another student, would raise their hand and just counter what's just being said. So it was a healthy debate, but I wasn't so used to such kind of debates. And then I came into the work environment where not very quickly, it took me a couple of years. I realized it was okay to challenge your boss if you don't
Mm.
agree with something.
Mm.
You don't do it because you're being asked to do it. That's why I'm also grateful to quite a few managers and directors I've had in my life who would prod, who would, like you just said earlier, act as, the devil's advocate.
Yeah.
And I think some of them did realize that I was hesitant to kind of, speak my mind or to push back or to challenge them.
Mm.
Some of them were actually nice enough to become the devil's advocate and say, okay, let me ask you, if we do it this way, would you agree? And I found that comfort, and it's over time, over a couple of years, I realized it's okay. You speak your mind, it's not such a bad thing.
Yeah.
and and yeah, now yeah, when I don't agree with something, I do speak my mind, and and it's okay.
And
And
nothing happens. People
no,
appreciate you for it. Yeah.
what's the worst they'll say? Like, no, I don't agree, and
Yeah.
this is how we go, and that's an executive order. Fine,
Yeah.
okay, but at least you brought it out to the table. You spoke. You put your ideas out there, and that's what's important at the end of the
Yeah.
day.
What is it like for you to live in France? Like, because you say there are cultural differences. There might be many. How do you see living in Paris? What is it like for you? Will you stay there for the rest of your life? Are you French now? Is your daughter French?
I'm French. My daughter's French. My husband's French because he's from India too.
Yeah.
For us, it's been an interesting adventure because we met here and we've
Mm.
literally built our lives here.
Mm.
So, yes, India is home. It'll always be home. Our roots are there. There's no challenging that. But France is somewhere at least I identify myself as an individual who found herself, who found her identity in France. So the people around, friends, colleagues, my workplace would become my extended family because, don't have extended family here. And just learning from them, absorbing. And my child, yeah, she's born here, she's raised here. So she's French, of course, with that little Indian culture that we are inculcating.
Hmm.
But this is home as well for me. So,
Yeah.
when we say like, do we in the future, do we think about going abroad? Yes, we do. We do imagine traveling, but this would always be base.
Yeah.
So this is where we come back.
Is there one thing that you won't ever get used to when it comes to the French style of living that you're like, well, I live here, but this is never going to happen?
Yeah, there are a lot of things. Like
Hmm.
I'm discovering the whole school culture now.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know it.
Yeah.
It's every grade. It's almost like I'm growing up with my
With
child.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
So we started out from kindergarten, and it was a whole
Yeah.
experience. So there is this whole world in France that I need to discover. The
Yeah.
same thing is about now that we meet more parents because she has friends who are French and being raised French. You learn about certain meal traditions. You learn about certain traditions around the cultural festivals, the
Yeah.
symbolism. So all that is still something I'm learning.
Yeah.
It was very different as students. You would just do what you want to do. As a
Yeah.
parent, it's a whole new learning curve.
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
So, no, there's nothing so far that's been like, this will probably never happen. I haven't
Yeah.
had that moment yet, but I am dreading doing mathematics the French way. Apparently, it's not very straightforward.
Yeah.
So,
You should get a clever tutor for that. Like
yeah, or
maybe
it'll
mom
be
shouldn't
her
get
dad,
into.
or
Yeah.
it'll be her dad. But
Yeah.
yeah, probably what I'm just dreading is how to do maths the French way.
Yeah.
But no, for the
Yeah.
rest of it, like I said, it's a choice I made to come to this country, build a life,
Yeah.
and so far so good.
Nice. Well, that's wonderful to hear. Nandita, we're almost at the end of this interview, but before we close off, I have three questions that I ask all my guests. Could you finish this sentence for me? As a
Hmm.
child, I wanted to become a
Teacher.
teacher. What happened?
I realize I don't have the patience to teach. I did try once. I tried becoming a French teacher, and I realized how much courage, patience, and motivation that my mom's a teacher.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And I literally, I truly, and I'm not saying this because you work at Teach Pitch or you work for teachers. I tell this also, I say this in school when I go back to pick my child up every day is I really respect how much they do to nurture your child.
Yeah.
And I don't think I had that in me, that amount of patience and motivation to individually look into every child
Yeah.
and, and give that amount of energy and time to it.
Yeah.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, because my mom was a teacher, I wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful choice. And kudos to your mom because she is exercising the patience and kind of
Oh,
all of
yes.
the above to
And she
make sure
continues
that
to do
everyone
so.
understands.
Mm,
Yeah. Then the next question is about reading.
right.
You mentioned that it's a luxury these days because you don't have a lot of time. But is
Mhm.
there in your journey any book that you would recommend to our listeners that you would say, hey, if you're interested in becoming a journalist or whatever inspired you to become who you are today, here's what you should read. Here's what inspired me.
I think if you want to be, okay, from a journalist perspective, one of the first books that really left a mark on me, and this is back when I was still in India, I think it was 2000, early 2000s still. It was Daniel Pearl's wife, the journalist who was
Yeah,
decapitated in
decapitated. Yeah,
Pakistan.
yeah,
Exactly. His wife, the book that she wrote, it's The Mighty Heart. And that book made a massive impact and also kind of
yeah,
gave me the, I didn't want to be in investigative journalism, but it just gave me an immense amount of respect for the profession.
yeah,
And so, yeah, that's probably one book that's left a mark
yeah.
immensely.
Nice. That's a beautiful recommendation. That's also you see that it started. It was a fire starter for you to kind of
Exactly.
build
That's
where
what
you. Yeah,
triggered it.
yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Nice. Yeah.
That's what triggered.
And then the very last question, Nandita. Let's turn the tables here.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's the Nandita Vijay Tandan podcast. I hope I got it right now.
Which Tandan, but okay.
Vich Tandan, Nandita Vich Tandan. I will get it right one time. And, Nandita
This
Vich Tandan.
Nandita is fine.
Nandita.
Forget the
The
which
Nandita
Tandan.
podcast. Now it's the Nandita
Nandita's
podcast.
podcast. Great.
Nandita's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Who would be kind of on your list, on your wish list, top of your wish list as someone you would like to have an in-depth conversation
Ooh, so many. They can be living, or they have to be living. I
with? It
imagine.
can be any. No, they don't have to be. I mean, this is kind of can be all encompassing. We've had many creative answers here. Dead, alive, in the future, everything.
Okay, I'm not saying this because I want to bring an emotional touch, but it's something that I've realized over the years. I lost my grandmother when I was in sixth grade,
Hmm.
but a lot of what she taught indirectly is what I apply today.
Hmm.
And one of the things I still remember her telling my mom actually, and I was just somebody just sitting and, passive listener, but it stuck here was if you can't, if you, there was some conversations about religion. And she said, the only true religion ever should be to be a good human being.
Hmm.
And that set in here, not that time, but it just comes back to mind now, especially in the context that we live in today. So I think if I had my own podcast and if I was an adult, she's probably one of the people I would really want to sit down.
Definitely, yeah. To dive into that deeper, like, yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. The other person it goes back to is somebody I admire a lot is Daniel Pearl's wife, Marianne,
Okay,
who went, and again it goes back to the book, is because not just because of the book, but all that she went through as a single mom, the experience. She herself is a journalist. So yeah, it's not the big Michelle Obamas or Barack Obamas. It's really people who are dealing with everyday life like I do, that I would
yeah,
sit down and would love to have a conversation with.
yeah.
You, for instance, with your entrepreneurial projects and one thing after another and the mindset. So yeah, if I had my own podcast, I would talk to everyday heroes as well. I mean, I think that's what I would probably call it that.
Everyday Heroes by Nandita.
Yeah, that's
Which
probably.
Tandan?
Or just Nandita is fine.
Nandita.
It's probably the everyday heroes who make,
Yeah, to
tiny
make the life.
differences, but who change the world.
Definitely. Well, on that note, Nandita, thank you very, very much for your
Well,
time.
thank
Thank you
you.
for taking us into this world of digital storytelling.
I
I
hope
wish you all the best in your adventure at Art Explored. And if people want to know
Thank you.
more, they can go to the URL, which is artexplored.com.
Yes,
Yes.
indeed.
And yeah, come back anytime. It was a lovely conversation.
And thank you for making the time and for having me.
Nandita Vich Tandan.
Bye. Take care.
Take care.
If you liked this episode, then it would mean the absolute world if you could share it with your friends and or give it a short review on your preferred podcast platform. The more you share your ideas about these interviews, the more people will find out about them. So do let us know what you think. We'd be very, very grateful.
Special thanks to Philip Anderson for our beautiful theme music. This episode was edited by Natalie Piles with production assistance from Genta Metalia.